Dear viewers, thank you for joining us. You are watching OBN Horn of Africa. This is our special edition, which is going to revolve around the current affairs in Ethiopia. I joined by Professor Lawrence Freeman, physically here in the capital, Finfinne. Lawrence Freeman, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure to be in Analyst with you.
All right, so far we have been having interview through Zoom. Now I met you physically here in the capital. Thank you for joining me once again. And upon your arrival, you tweeted saying, in quote unquote, I arrived in Ethiopia despite the psychological war by the West and the US State Department, all culminates, bars, restaurants open at night, hotels are operating. Plane was nearly full from the US normal operation at airport. Stop the lying, stop disinformation, no Afghanistan here, and finally, no to regime change, you've said.
Yes.
Okay, what inspires you to tweet this? Obviously, we know what inspires you, but can you comprehend it the way you wrote this tweet?
Well, we've seen escalating over a period of months and weeks and days there's been an increase in the psychological warfare campaign directed against Ethiopia. Psychological warfare is meant to break the morale and weaken the spirit to fight. And I knew that all the allegations were wrong, including my own government, State Department, saying, do not go, it's dangerous. And I came here, and of course I've been to Addis many times, and you see Addis is normal. People on the streets, people at the coffee shops, I've been out to restaurants and bars. So therefore it was all disinformation. And it was done intentionally because anybody who comes here sees exactly what I see. You don't need X-ray vision. It's there on the streets. And therefore the government and the embassy here is reporting disinformation designed to misinform people. And this is part of a campaign against Ethiopia. And they're trying to, the long-range plan, if successful, would be some kind of regime change. And this is what I do not want to see. I'm putting all my efforts in the United States and my trip here to Ethiopia to stop my government, my president, Joe Biden, from going along with a regime change, which would be horrible for Ethiopia, horrible for the Horn of Africa, and actually for the entire continent of Africa. And this is what I'm out to stop.
Okay, different Western nations are insisting their citizens to evacuate from Ethiopia this time. Yes. But in contrary, you prefer to come to Addis, to Finfinne, to the capital of the nation, amid this false propaganda, amid this psychological war. How you chose to come here while knowing all those reports through different media outlets?
Well, I'm a unique individual, and when I come to a conclusion in my mind that a cause is just, then I throw myself into it. And I've been studying Ethiopia for the last about 12 years, and I've been studying Africa for over 30 years. And I recognize the contributions that Ethiopia is making to Africa and to the Horn of Africa. And when I see that it was coming under attack by the TPLF, a separate ethnic group, launching an attack to overthrow an elected government, this fight I knew I had to join. And when I saw my own government, in a sense, legitimizing this ethnic group, the TPLF, and legitimizing them to an elected government, and then all kinds of hysterical claims by my Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, genocide, ethnic cleansing, rape as a weapon. Being an old hand myself, I realized right away that they're trying to create the impression of a crisis that Ethiopia cannot handle in order to justify regime change or military intervention, which actually has a name. It's called responsibility to protect, R2P. It was put forth by George Soros, the creator of Open Society, and Tony Blair, the former prime minister. And they said that the international community, in their great wisdom, has the right to intervene militarily in a sovereign nation if they deem that nation is not protecting its people.
Appreciate it. In your tweet, you've said no Afghanistan here. What do you mean by that?
Well, because we saw the escalation. First there was danger in Ethiopia, then there was rumored to be a capability of shooting down a plane. Then the State Department, with no justification whatsoever, says, we are not going to organize an airlift for Americans in Ethiopia. So you should get out now on your own because there'll be no airlift. Now this is, beside the fact that it was disgusting, this is typical psychological warfare because there's no connection, there's no similarity, there's no parallel between what happened in Afghanistan, which was a 20-year failed U.S. intervention, and Ethiopia, which is a functioning, live nation. And there's no comparison. The fact that they said that should have been a tip-off to any thoughtful person that this is psychological warfare, because there's no justification for it.
Good job. Okay. About which Ethiopia does the U.S. government yelling now and then these days? Shall we wait the worst scenario that the U.S. government describes these days?
I think what you have to realize is it's not simply the U.S. government. The U.S. government is comprised of many factions. There is a faction that believes that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is not acting under their control. And they're willing to destabilize and cause a war if necessary because he's taking Ethiopia on an independent path, not under the control of this political financial elite, which I refer to as an oligarchy. However, there are other factions in the U.S. government, and probably including President Biden himself, who don't want to go to war. I don't believe President Biden wants the destruction of Ethiopia as part of his legacy. But we have different groups, competing groups in the same government. And therefore, what we have to do is we have to make the penalty very, very high for the oligarchical faction to go ahead with regime change. And the best way to do that is to announce it that that's their intention in advance. So you alert the whole world, and then if they try to move in that direction, then everybody knows you were right. And that causes them difficulties.
Okay. Why the U.S. government is paranoid with the TPLF's affection, while TPLF is being denounced by Ethiopians in Ethiopia here and Ethiopians in diaspora?
Well, you have a number of people in the Biden administration who are very close to the TPLF for a long time. And they're in the administration. And they seem to believe that the TPLF, it's better to have the TPLF in power and rule through them than have a Democratic elected government. Look at it's very clear the contrast. Prime Minister Abiy, he got appointed by the special counsel back in 2018. Then he got elected in 2021 in 2 votes, June and September. Combined, about 43 million people voted. That made him the legitimate democratically elected leader. The TPLF says, no, we don't respect that. We're going to overthrow the government. And what the United States did, and the Congress did, and Antony Blinken did, is they then said, oh, we have another group, the TPLF, that we have to legitimize, and we have to create an equality between the government, elected by the people, and the TPLF, who launched the war. By legitimizing the TPLF, who launched the war back in November of last year, they are creating the conditions to bring the TPLF back into power, either by removing Abiy, which they've discussed, or some kind of transitional government. Either way, that would not be acceptable to the people of Ethiopia, because they will not accept the TPLF militarily coming back to power after they've already elected the Prosperity Party.
Recently, some retired TPLF diplomats and other personalities who have affiliation to the TPLF, the worn-out TPLF, had a virtual meeting secretly, right?
Yes.
What is your insight about that secret virtual meeting, and what does that signify having it in non-public situation, in secret?
I wasn't surprised that such a group conspired to have the meeting, but it was shocking to hear some of the things they said. Now, one thing about the meeting was with retired diplomats from Europe and the United States, with the former ambassador here, who's now the head of the TPLF, Bahani. But also, one of the participants was Daniel Yamamoto, who I've known in Washington. He was the acting Secretary of State for African Affairs under Trump, and maybe possibly under Obama. Now, therefore, he was a former American official, not just a retired diplomat. The president, these people have a connection to the presidency. And I think they're all Democrats. They don't run the country, but in my country, the United States, retired diplomats, retired CIA, retired national security, they still have a part of the power. They're part of the discussion process. Therefore, that discussion made very clear that there's a faction of the U.S. government that is directly supporting the TPLF. If anyone had any doubts, they have no doubts after that meeting.
Appreciate it again. So on that meeting, those individuals were uttering, saying, after the post-transition, and one of the well-known economists, Eleni Gebramedin, used to utter saying, the Marshall Plan, which was implemented during the Second World War. And during the Second World War, Marshall Plan was a model used to lift up the economic shock of the Second World War.
Yes.
Is that possible to compare and contrast the Second World War with the current conflict in Ethiopia?
No. The Marshall Plan, which I've studied, was a plan to bring Europe up out of the rubble of World War II. And you already had industrialized states, in Germany especially, and the Germans used the Marshall Plan credits very effectively to rebuild their steel industry, to rebuild their coal industry. And that was a war that went on for 4 to 5 years. Many millions of people died. There's no connection. Those were nations declaring war on other nations. The situation in Ethiopia should not be confused. You have a separatist group, which the government has labeled terrorist, and they have declared war on a legitimately elected nation. And millions of people have not died. There are millions of people displaced and suffering, but millions of people have not died. And it's not nations that are fighting each other, it's an ethnic rebel group labeled terrorist that are trying to overthrow an elected government. The other aspect, though, is really we should be thinking ahead to finally settling this war. And what do we have to do in Ethiopia to bring people out of this? We have 7 million IDP, individual displaced people in Amara and Afar. We have a few millions in Tigray. So there's going to have to be a very aggressive reconstruction program led by the government. The TPLF is going to be, hopefully the TPLF will be defeated and we move ahead with a reconstruction program, but that's going to require a lot of work, and that is development. And that is something that the West should help with, since the West aided in the current crisis itself. Now, whether they will or not, I have no idea.
Okay, the imperialists and their media were having a romantic dance while TPLF was advancing to the capital before fortnight. Now, in contrast, the federal government is undertaking a counter-offensive, and instead the federal government is advancing to Tigray.
Yes.
In this time, before they were talking about the transitional government, the US government said and signed with those personalities a kind of memorandum to assign a transitional government in the US. But now, while the Ethiopian government is advancing to Tigray, they are begging for a ceasefire. Why such contradiction is going on there?
But according to reports I've gotten, which I have not privy to first-hand knowledge, the Ethiopian National Defense Forces are stronger and are making military progress on the ground. Obviously, the government would like to defeat the TPLF militarily. I think the quicker the conflict can be brought to an end, and there will have to be a political negotiation at some point, and it's possible that the former president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, will play an important role for the African Union. But the faction that wants the regime change against Abiy, obviously they're very nervous about a military defeat for the TPLF, and they may be reevaluating what they think they can accomplish, and therefore taking an option B, which is, okay, we can't get what we want, so we'll go for a lesser option, which is ceasefire. I doubt that the government will commit to a ceasefire unless it has the upper hand. And then there has to be political discussion.
Okay, very colossal, most figure of individuals in diaspora are into the street and showing their denouncement to the U.S. government throughout the globe, we can say that.
Mm-hmm.
Even Africa today, in the U.S. and Canada,
right,
everywhere else. Would such kind of rally change the Biden's administration's and its policy in Ethiopia that they had upon Ethiopia?
It could have an effect if it's conducted in the right way. I'm in touch with various parts of the Diaspora community when I'm back in the United States and even while I'm here. There's a very large group of Ethiopian diaspora, over 1 million, maybe up to 3 million. If they function as a coordinated unit, which means they'd have to give up their grievances with each other for the purpose of a united front to save Ethiopia from regime change. And that's the first condition. The second condition is they fight the way I'm fighting, which is name the policy out front. Don't go around the edges. Call it what it is, regime change. If they do that, they could have a significant effect. And of course, you may not know this as well as us Americans, but the Democratic Party is in trouble. They have suffered a major defeat in the recent election in Virginia. Right now, the Republicans may have a good chance of retaking the Senate and the House next November. I know there's a little bit in the weeds for Ethiopians, but these could be very close congressional and senatorial races next November. The Ethiopians, if they can organize themselves, they could shift the election possibly in a few places where they can put themselves together and go Republican if the Democrats continue to threaten Ethiopia. So there are various productive things the diaspora can do if they're organized properly.
We are noticing a kind of paradigm shift from the side of the U.S. government these days. For instance, they issued a statement to just take the U.S. aid completely from Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. And on the next day, they said U.S. aid should be there in Ethiopia because it ought to help those vulnerable individuals. On the other day, Antonio Blinken on its statement said, as the U.S. government has no connection with TPLF now onwards, what does it signify again?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't call it a paradigm shift. That's much too strong a term. It's not a paradigm. What it is, it's the maneuvering, because they may feel right now, there's two things that have happened. One is, according to reports, the military force of the government, and combination with the militias, have made some military gains. I'm not a military expert. I know what I would do, but I have no knowledge of what's actually going on the ground. The second thing is the atrocities in Afar and Amara are bigger than what's going on in Tigray. Now, no atrocity is good, but you've now got more people suffering as a result of the TPLFs offensive in those two regions than allegedly was happening in Tigray. And this is starting to leak out. Some of the massacres, I read some reports. So therefore, this may be forcing them to shift their position. I wouldn't call paradigm, but they're basically wiggling around to maybe figure out what's the best option to come. From my standpoint, given everything that's being done to Ethiopia, a country I have great affection for, I would rather be no other place than here right now defending Ethiopia and defending Ethiopia's sovereignty. I stand on Ethiopian soil to defend it because that's what the right thing to do is. And I fight for what I believe is right. And there's a question of natural law involved. You have a sovereign nation state under attack. No matter what the imperfections are, you have to defend the principle of sovereignty. Otherwise, we have no basis of functioning in a civilization. So there's no place I'd rather be than Analyst right now.
I would like to wrap up my discussion here. But finally, the global media these days make Ethiopia as if Ethiopia is a war zone and conflict zone, and as if it's not a place to be. Right. But you are here, noticed everything is going well. What would you like to urge to the global community by disproving those reporters from CNN, BBC, whatever?
Well, the media is, look,
from CNN, BBC, whatever.
The media is just out and out lying. Look, governments, maybe not you and me, but governments have satellites. They see the pictures on the ground at us. They see the main corridors filled with cars and people at the coffee shops. They have satellite imagery. So who's fooling whom here? Everyone knows what the truth is. The media is lying. The ambassador here in Addis for the United States, I'm sure she leaves the embassy at some point. She sees exactly what was going on. So it's not a question of people not knowing. This is deliberate lying, therefore I call it psy-war. It's not that they're confused. It's not that they're misinformed. They are intentionally disinforming to create a perception around the world and in Ethiopia and in Africa. But the African nations I'm in touch with, they will all realize that Ethiopia should be defended. In their hearts, they're feeling the pain that's going on here, my African friends in other countries. And they want Ethiopia to succeed because it's a very important nation, historically and currently, to the continent of Africa.
Okay, Professor Lawrence Freeman, thank you for standing by the side of the truth, and thank you for your time to come and visit the reality here in Ethiopia. Thank you for revealing the truth once again.
My pleasure. This is where I want to be.
Anytime. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Dear viewers, this brings you the end of our edition for today. Bye-bye. Have a good one.